They say the deepest truths can't be spoken, only lived. Wittgenstein didn't just believe that, he built an entire philosophy around it. And here's the paradox that pulls you in. The man who revolutionized philosophy with language ended his most famous book by telling us to be silent. Why? What was the truth he couldn't say, the one he circled, hinted at, fenced in with logic, only to point beyond it and shut his mouth? If you've ever felt language failing you at the very moment something real, raw, and ultimate was about to surface, you've already stood where he stood. You've felt the edge of what words can carry. You've met the border between saying and showing. Wittgenstein knew that philosophy wasn't a set of answers, but a kind of therapy. A way to cure the mind of its confusions, to free us from the illusions we create with our own words. He took language, dissected it, and then did something almost spiritual with it. He used it like a ladder to climb out of a problem, and then told you to throw the ladder away. That's not just technical brilliance, that's existential courage. It's the courage to admit that thought, at its pinnacle, must bow to silence. Picture him in the trenches of World War I, a book of Tolstoy in his pocket, facing death daily, thinking about logic and ethics and God. Imagine the contrast, the horror of war and the cold precision of analytic philosophy. Yet that contrast is the whole point. For Wittgenstein, what mattered most couldn't be captured by propositions. Logic was a map, but life was the territory. And the territory, meaning, value, beauty, the good, can be pointed to, but not described without distortion. That is the truth he couldn't say. The most important things are not things we can state, they are things we must live. He wrote propositions as if they were bars in a cage, closing in more and more tightly around the problem of meaning, only to reveal at the end that the cage had no real walls, only illusions of structure we had constructed. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. It isn't an invitation to mysticism in the sentimental sense, nor is it a cop-out. It's a command to rigor. Stop pretending language can do what only action, attention, and transformation can do. Stop confusing description with experience. Think about how we talk about love, or God, or death, or the feeling of truly understanding another human being. We use metaphors, stories, gestures, and pauses. We reach and stretch and fail. The failure isn't a defect, it's a sign. It's the world telling you, you've come to the limit of what sentences can perform. You now have a choice. Either you keep piling words on top of words and call it philosophy, or you fall quiet and let the thing itself speak through how you live. Wittgenstein chose silence, but not the silence of withdrawal, the silence of honesty. The Tractatus looks like a mathematical machine, but it is secretly a spiritual act. It sets up every possible route for language to do what we ask of it, and then shows, proposition by proposition, why it can't. It shows you how far logic can go and then says, look at what remains. Ethics, aesthetics, the meaning of life, these are not problems to be solved, but mysteries to be inhabited. They do not stand in the world as facts. They give the world its form. And because they give it form, they cannot be added to it like another sentence on a page. They are shown in the way you see the page at all. Later in his life, Wittgenstein turns from crystalline structure to everyday words, from the architecture of logic to the messiness of life. Language games. Forms of life. Meaning as use. He abandons the fantasy that there is a perfect logical skeleton underneath our speech and moves into the marketplace of words, the ordinary, the lived. But that same humility, that same urge to expose illusion remains. In the early Wittgenstein, the unsayable is the mystical. In the later Wittgenstein, the unsayable is embedded in our practices, our shared forms of life, the tacit background without which words would float without anchor. In both cases, the truth he can't say is the ground of saying itself. We want philosophy to give us final answers. He wanted to show us the fly bottle and then let the fly out. He wanted us to see that most philosophical problems are knots tied by our language, and that the solution isn't a breakthrough theory, but a patient untying. The truth he couldn't say, that the meaning of your life won't be delivered in a proposition. It will be revealed in how you stop misusing propositions to avoid life. Let's get personal. How often do you hide behind words? How often do you use abstract terms, growth, purpose, consciousness, love, as if saying them gets you closer to them? Wittgenstein would stare at you not unkindly, but with an almost painful directness, and ask, "What do you mean? How do you live it? What is the practice, the form of life, that gives this word its meaning? If you can't show it, do you truly know it? And if you can't live it, why are you speaking?" Imagine someone asking, "What is the meaning of life?" He would likely answer, "Look at how you use the word meaning. Look at the grammar of your questions. You want a sentence that will rescue you. But what if the sentence you are seeking is not a sentence at all, but a shift in orientation? A transformation of how you attend to the world?" This is the philosophical equivalent of therapy. Not replacing one belief with another, but changing the way you inhabit belief as such. When Wittgenstein says ethics cannot be put into words, he isn't eliminating ethics. He is sanctifying it. He is saying, the ethical does not live in the same space as the factual. It's not a kind of superfact. It's the horizon within which facts gain significance. Just as a frame around a painting is not part of the image, but determines how you see it, ethics is the frame of the world. And frames aren't described, they're seen or missed. This is why he was so fierce about honesty, so intense about precision, so intolerant of philosophical laziness. Because for him, language was not a playground. It was the sharpest tool we had for dissolving confusion. But tools have limits. And reverence begins at the limit. The silence at the end of the Tractatus is reverence, not surrender. Ask yourself, what truths in your own life are you trying to force into words? What pains, what loves, what intuitions keep slipping away from your definitions? Maybe the point isn't to say them better. Maybe the point is to make your life the medium in which they can finally be seen. When a musician can no longer explain the feeling of music he plays, when a philosopher can no longer explain the meaning of life he lives. Wittgenstein played silence like an instrument, but there's a danger here, and he knew it. Silence can also become a mask, a way to dodge clarity, a mystical pose. Wittgenstein's silence is not an aesthetic. It's the end point of a ruthless commitment to say only what can be said, and to refuse to pretend the rest. That refusal is the most ethical move a philosopher can make, because it protects what is highest from being dragged into the mud of argument and turned into an opinion. Think of how we throw words like God around. He would ask, what work is that word doing in your life? If it's merely naming a metaphysical object, he'd say you've misunderstood language. If it's a way of pointing to value, to the unspeakable orientation of your soul toward the good, then perhaps the right response is not a theory, but a kind of silence that expresses humility. The kind that looks like a life carefully lived, not a sentence perfectly formed. So here is the thread that runs through his early and late philosophy, through logic and language games, through propositions and practices. Philosophy is an activity, not a doctrine. Its job is to show the fly the way out, not to build the fly a palace of glittering words. The truth he couldn't say is the one he tried to show, that the meaning of life, the ethical, the mystical, these do not live inside our sentences. They live in the clarity with which we act, attend, and love. And when language has done its work, you put it down, you look, you live. You let the truth speak where your words cannot. You may wonder, why did Wittgenstein, a man of such fierce intellect, spend so much of his life in isolation? Why did he teach only a handful of students, publish almost nothing in his lifetime, and leave behind cryptic notes rather than manifestos? The answer is hidden in how he understood the truth. For Wittgenstein, truth wasn't a product to be delivered. It was a transformation to undergo. It couldn't be packaged for mass consumption. It had to be wrestled with in solitude, silence, and often suffering. His entire approach to philosophy was not to add more theories to the pile, but to deconstruct the illusions that keep us from seeing clearly. He compared philosophy to therapy, not because it soothes you, but because it confronts your confusions with ruthless clarity. He didn't want disciples. He wanted people to think for themselves, to stop mimicking and start perceiving. He believed most of our problems don't come from reality, but from the way our language deceives us about reality. And so he worked, word by word, to dissolve the illusions we didn't even know we had. It's tempting to believe that the greatest minds hand us answers. Wittgenstein handed us tools. Tools to see where our thought goes off track, where our assumptions sneak in unnoticed, where we reach for abstract concepts, because the concrete is too frightening to face. If he left behind any kind of commandment, it would be this: don't pretend to understand what you don't. Speak only what you can justify. And when you reach the point where no words will do, be still. Because that stillness might be the closest you'll ever get to the truth. The second half of his life, spent writing what would become the Philosophical Investigations, was a shift, not away from his earlier insights, but deeper into them. He stopped searching for an ideal language and started listening to the language we use. He realized that meaning is not fixed by logic, but formed in use. It's born in life, not in theory. So, instead of explaining the meaning, he began describing the contexts in which meaning arises. A word doesn't have a hidden essence. It has a function. It lives in a family of usages, like a thread in a vast tapestry of shared practices. This realization dismantled the illusion that there is a single, unchanging core to meaning. It was a kind of philosophical humility, a recognition that language isn't something we stand outside of, controlling from above. We are immersed in it, shaped by it, constrained and liberated by it. And yet, the moment we become aware of this, we gain power. Not the power to master language, but the power to stop being mastered by our false assumptions about it. But what about the big questions? What about God, death, morality, the soul? Wittgenstein didn't dismiss them. He gave them even more reverence by refusing to flatten them into statements. He once wrote, "Even if all possible scientific questions be answered, the problems of life have still not been touched at all." That sentence alone could stand as the cornerstone of his vision. You can know everything about physics, biology, and psychology, and still have no idea how to live, how to love, how to be. That's not failure. That's the beginning of wisdom. Wittgenstein showed us that when language is used properly, it shows its limits. A well-crafted sentence reveals the boundary of what can be said, and that boundary, that's where life begins, the realm of love, awe, and despair. The realm where we make meaning not through definitions, but through decisions, through presence, through silence. He never asked you to stop thinking. He asked you to think so precisely, so rigorously, that you finally see where thought ends and something deeper begins. Not emotion, not instinct, but something like perception without words. A way of seeing that isn't mediated by statements. An ethical clarity, not informational. He wanted us to experience the world directly, not through a haze of concepts, but through presence. The taste of an apple, the warmth of a hand, the stillness of dawn. These are not facts in the scientific sense, but they are truths, and we must not mistake one for the other. In this way, Wittgenstein is not just a philosopher. He is a mystic of precision, a saint of silence. A man who knew that language, like a map, is most helpful when he knows it is not the territory. And when it's done all it can, we fold it up, put it away, and walk forward, eyes open. What does this mean for us today? It means we must stop worshipping explanations. We must stop mistaking information for transformation. In an age of endless noise, he calls us to quiet. In a world of instant opinions, he calls us to examine the roots of our words. In a culture that prizes being right, he reminds us that clarity is more important than correctness. And when we reach the edge of what can be said, he does not say, give up. He says, pay attention. There is deep wisdom in restraint. There is power in knowing when to stop speaking. In a world obsessed with having the last word, Wittgenstein teaches us the value of having no word at all. So, where does that leave us? Perhaps with more questions than answers. But perhaps that's exactly where we need to be. Not chasing ultimate explanations, but noticing what lies beneath them. Not trying to pin down the meaning of life, but learning to live in a way that lets meaning emerge. He didn't give us a philosophy to adopt. He gave us a mirror. And what we see in it depends on how honestly we're willing to look. Now, I turn to you. What truths in your life can't be said, but only shown? What realities have you tried to force into language, only to find they evaporate the moment you try to describe them? What might happen if you let silence do some of the speaking? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your experience. Or simply leave a moment of silence. Sometimes that says more than 1,000 words. If this video made you pause, reflect, or see differently, consider giving it a like. And if you're drawn to the kind of philosophy that transforms, not just informs, subscribe to the channel for more. Remember, the deepest truths are not found in what we say, but in how we live when the words are gone.